Welcome to the Wade Center's podcast.
A podcast of Wheaton College. My name is David Downing.
And I'm Crystal Downing. We are the new co-directors here at the Marion E. Wade Center.
And we're excited to bring you our new podcast.
The Wade Center's podcast will feature interviews and discussions with scholars and figures related to the Wade's 7 authors.
C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, Dorothy L. Sayers, George MacDonald, G.K. Chesterton, Owen Barfield, and Charles Williams. Our guest, again, is Doug Gresham.
This third episode features a discussion with Doug about his reaction when he first discovered that the Wade Center was collecting the Lewis family's papers, as well as his experiences here at the Wade. Things also get rather personal in this episode as Doug discusses his children, his wife's conversion to Christ as a result of listening to Mere Christianity on tape, and how she eventually helped lead him, in turn, to Christ. Make sure you stick around until the end of the episode as Doug discusses some of his memories of Dorothy L. Sayers, Tolkien, Barfield, and other members of the Inklings such as Hugo Dyson, who is the subject of a forthcoming article in Volume 35 of 7, the academic journal that the Wade Center publishes. Make sure to connect with our podcast and subscribe on our website, wheaton.edu/Wade, as well as iTunes, Spotify, and even on our YouTube channel.
This week you will hear questions from Crystal and me, along with Marjorie Mead, the Associate Director here at the Wade Center.
We hope you enjoy this week's episode. So this reflection was generated by my question about your memories of the Wade, and I'm sure part of your appreciation of the Wade is Dorset willing to collect the manuscripts of this amazing human being, because his story needs to be told and reiterated, and that's why we're so glad that we have you here to help maintain that memory. So just give us some reflections about how you felt when you discovered there was an archive.
Well, to begin with, it was quite a surprise. I didn't realize that people were collecting Jack's works and my mother's works and so forth. And even Warner's stuff is here too, which now I think is just absolutely great. And when I first heard about it, I thought, well, Americans are always a bit wacky about things. Yeah. I'm a half American kind of thing. I don't know how much strength of the Americanism there still is in me. And I thought, well, I came here and I found out what was really happening here. I thought, well, this is a very good idea. And these people are accepting a responsibility which is partially mine. I mean, I was Jack's stepson. I was the person he cared for, looked after when everybody else had gone. And therefore, I thought, I owe him a sense of responsibility to look after his works as best I can. And I've been doing that ever since that realization. We founded the C.S. Lewis Company, and that took off and started to be a viable enterprise. I inherited, everybody thinks I started with a silver spoon in my mouth, but that's not quite true. I inherited an estate in which the previous owner had drunk all the proceeds and never paid any taxes. And that made the whole thing very difficult for a few years. But we managed to get through it. But I think that seeing the interest that was going on here and what Clyde Kilby had founded made me realize that there really was, on my part, a huge responsibility to accept or to reject, as the case may be. And my brother rejected it, and I accepted it. And so here we are today. But I enjoyed being here that first time very much indeed. And Peter Veltman turned to me after we'd done all the recording, I think it took 3 days all told, and said, Doug, this is a book. He'd been talking with Lyle behind my back, of course. And I said, well, come on, Lyle, you're the historian. You should write it. He said, no, this is your story. You have to write it. And Peter said, yes, it's got to be you who writes it. So I said, well, the best way of doing that I can think of would be to get a transcript of the what we'd said on the tape, on the film in those days. And so they got a transcript down here at the Wade Center. It wasn't in this building then, but of course it was still the Wade Center. And I forget the name of the girl who then typed it all out and presented it to me, and she was standing there handing me bits, and I would then take these pieces away and start to write longhand how to translate them into my idea of the chapters of the book. And she would take them away and type them. I can't remember her name. Do you remember her?
We had several people at that time, so I'm not sure. But
And the result was
I do.
like...
Steve Parker was the man who ran the camera.
Oh yeah, that's right. Steve Parker. That's right. Yeah, indeed.
So yeah.
Yeah, it was an interesting exercise for me because I was already in broadcasting, so I wasn't worried about cameras and filming and so on at all. But it was fascinating to find out that somebody was interested in what had happened back then and how I'd got to where I was. And of course, things have changed radically since then.
Well, I remember that visit well, of course. And remember that just 1 year after that, you came back with your entire family.
Yeah, the whole bunch, yeah.
Because you wanted them to meet us and us to meet them.
Exactly.
So that was...
And they've never forgotten it. The boys still talk about it sometimes to this day.
Yeah. Well, why don't you just mention your children for a moment?
Well, I have 5 children all told. My eldest son is James, who's now 50. And he was an airline captain for Delta here in the States for, I can't remember how many years. But he worked in aviation for a long time. Then he finally got sick of being an airline captain and wrote to me and said, Daddles, I want to give up being a pilot and buy a farm. I said, well, I'll give you every help I can. So we went away together. I was actually filming in New Zealand at the time. But he said, can you get a week off? I've got a short list of farms I'd like. He was using my big motorhome to travel around and find places. And I went with him for the 7 properties he wanted me to look at. And it was in a terrible drought at the stage. So we went to the farms, and I noticed that the cattle on these farms were all fat. There was no pasture in the paddocks. And, of course, they were feeding the cattle by hand to make them look fat, so people would think this is a great farm. So I said to James, look, I've got to get back and filming again, but don't look for a farm where the cattle are fat. Look for a farm where the kangaroos are fat, because nobody feeds the kangaroos. And they were all starving too. So he did that, and he found a wonderful little farm, big farm, it's 3,000 acres, up in the high country in northern New South Wales. And he runs that to this day. And then the next door place came on the prop market, so I bought that as well. So we've got 6,000 acres that we share, and James runs it as a beef production property very well too. He's a good farmer. And my second son, Timothy, was working for Abbott Diagnostics, or Abbott Pharmaceuticals first, and as a salesman. And every year they hold a big shindig for all the different reps. And they hand out awards for the people who did the best work. And this particular time they went to Seville in Spain. And Dig is Timothy's nickname. He was very embarrassed because he won all the awards on every class, and he shared one with another guy. And then they took them out to a ranch, bullfight ranch, where they bred the bulls for the bullfights. And they asked these mostly Americans if they wanted to have a go at, with the cape and see what they could do with it. They had a bull with blunted horns, and obviously not very dangerous. So they called these guys out. The guys went out and mostly got upended pretty quickly. Dig went down there, threw the cape away, grabbed the thing, threw it by its horns, and knelt on its neck. Because he'd grown up since he was a baby, tossing cattle around. And he got huge amounts of cheers from all the American guys, and the Spaniards were furious because the thing was so demoralized it wouldn't get up again. So he now runs his own medical diagnostics importation and distribution company in Australia and is doing very well. Our youngest son, Dominic, by the way, Dig's married with 2 sons. And James is married with 2 sons. Dig's got 2 sons and a girl, a lovely little daughter. She's not that little anymore. She's growing up. That happens too fast, doesn't it? Anyway, Dominic has 5 children. He's got 4 boys. And I was shooting Prince Caspian. Dawn Treader, I beg your pardon. No, it was Prince Caspian, that's right. Prince Caspian, partly in New Zealand and partly in the Czech Republic. But when his 5th baby started to show up, he thought, well, we've got to pick up a girl's name. We're going to have another girl, obviously. And, of course, this little boy popped out of the chute, and he had no name for about 3 weeks. And finally, they decided to call him Caspian. And because Dominic's nickname from babyhood onwards has always been Pickle, and Caspian was a little boy at the time. He's got bigger now, of course. He got the nickname of Gherkin, or the Royal Capsicum, and all kinds of nicknames. They are wonderful kids, all of them, and we adore them enormously. The grandkids, the older ones, are now at university and so on. So time does shoot past rather quickly. But then we decided, after Lucinda had been born, and she's a very talented young lady, a brilliant young girl, and she, like everybody else in youth, does some silly things, or did some silly things. She found herself finally a single mom, But she went to Florence for 7 years and trained as a gem setter and jeweler. In fact, she made this cross with Arslan on it for me, which is black diamonds in silver. She just thought she wanted to make me a present, and I'm very grateful for it. I think it's beautiful. And she makes very fine jewelry for people, but they come to her with the idea in their mind of what they want, and they describe it, and she draws it. And when they get the drawing perfect to what the person wants, Lucinda will go and make it for them. And she's very, very talented indeed. We're all very proud of her, I'm afraid. Well, we're proud of all our kids. And she has a little daughter called Velvet, who is gorgeous. So that's about where. And then, of course, we didn't stop there after Lucinda. We a bit later on, we decided, well, we've got enough energy to raise another one. So we adopted a child from Korea. And she's absolutely gorgeous, a beautiful little girl. I say little girl, she's 33, I think now, 34 perhaps. I'm very bad at numbers. And she's 4 feet 9 inches tall. And she lives in Ireland, and she teaches English as a second language to migrants from various places with a Korean face and body, tiny little structure of 4 feet 9 inches tall, and a broad Irish accent, which is gorgeous. You know? She comes over and visits us every now and again, and we're always absolutely delighted to see her. She's a lovely person.
I was going to ask you, too, to talk a little bit about Mary. I've had the joy of getting to know all of your family one time or another. And I remember one of your trips here, and we'd been talking about, obviously, your love for your stepfather and so on, and gave you a copy of Mere Christianity on tape, and you took it back. And would you like to share that story with Mary?
Yeah, well, Mary never used to read. She's dyslexic. She can't read very well. She finds it onerous to read, but now that she started reading the Bible more thoroughly, she's starting to read more, which is good. But at that time, she was looking after the gardens at the farm. She was looking after the calves and helping me milk and all this sort of thing. We all worked together on the farms. And I came over here, and as you say, you gave me a copy of Mere Christianity on tape. And Mary had been brought up by a slightly lunatic mother who was a committed Roman Catholic, but not really a Christian, if you can understand what that means. You probably can. Catholics, to my mind and my experience, vary from one extreme to another. Either they're very, very Catholic and not in the least bit Christian, or they're middle of the field, they're Christian and Catholic in a way, or they become deeply committed Christians and remain Roman Catholics. And I've met some of each. This particular woman was extremely Catholic and not in the least bit Christian. And so Mary got an absolute horror for all things to do with Christianity. And she refused to listen to anyone who wanted to talk about God or about Jesus for years. I came back from Wheaton with this lovely set of tapes and cassettes. And I had bought her what we used to call a Walkman, which was a little tiny tape player with headphones, because she used to love to go out and listen to stories on this thing while she was digging in the garden or picking the vegetables or whatever, because we grew all our own food and we still do for that matter. And anyway, this particular day, she'd run out of story tapes. And she thought, what am I going to listen to? What was that thing that Dallas brought back from America? And then she looked at, Mere Christianity on tape. She said, well, Mere Christianity, I didn't like the sound that much, but I'll give it a go. So she stuck the first tape in, went out in the garden, pressed the on button. And she tells me to this day, she had her finger hovering over the stop button in case she started to hear the sort of drivel that her mother used to spruik at her. And suddenly, for the first time in her life, she found the real story of Christ and what he was and who he was and what he did and why he did it emerging from Jack's writings. And she just couldn't stop listening to it. And from that day on, she committed her life to Christ and has been committed to Christ ever since. She beat me by about 2 years, actually. Yeah. But that brought Mary into Christ, and that's resulted in most of the family becoming committed Christians.
So just mention, you've talked about it in other places many times, but so what is your story for how you came to Christ?
Well, to start with, I thought Mary had gone slightly insane, because when she just sort of suddenly became so committed to Christ, she was so concentrating on Christ and everything to do with him, that she sort of became no earthly good for a while. In fact, she put her daughter's pajamas in the refrigerator on one occasion to put them away. The sort of stuff she wasn't thinking about it. But I really thought, well, maybe she's gone a bit wacko, But I got myself into one of the things. I got myself into trouble in a way by trying to do the right thing, but I was doing it my way instead of Christ's way, and I developed a relationship with a young girl, which resulted in everybody getting hurt. It wasn't as bad as it could have been, but it was bad enough. And I suddenly realized that I am not qualified to run a human life. Now, if you're a farmer and you have a tractor and something blows up in the engine of the tractor and you can't figure out what to do about it, you go to the maker's manual and you look up what these parts are and what they do and how you fix them. And so I thought, well, I'm not qualified to run a human life and I'm the smartest guy I know. So who is? And the answer, of course, was you go to the maker's manual. And I picked up the Bible and started to read the Gospels. And I had sunk to I'd been in a very bad state because I was also quite sick at the time. And I was suffering from enormous depressions and so forth. A very clever doctor finally sorted that out after I'd committed my life to Christ because I prayed about it. And having realized that the only person who is in fact qualified to run a human life is Jesus Christ, I turned my life and myself and everything I have and everything I am over to him and to his service. And all of a sudden, the depression just vanished. I sat down in a place that would have terrified me. I mean, I got to the stage where I was too scared to get out of the car when I took Mary to places like meetings and so forth. But I went to see another committed Christian couple, the guy was a farrier, a blacksmith, shoeing horses, and his wife was a lovely person too. And I sat down. Normally I would have been on edge, nervous, frightened to be in these people's company. And I was absolutely filled with a peace I had never felt before and a joy that I'd never felt before. And I realized that suddenly, all of a sudden, Christ was with me because I'd asked him to be. All we have to do is ask. You have to swallow your pride and ask Jesus to take you over, take yourself over. And since then, I've been serving Christ. And it has been the most rewarding way of life that anyone could possibly encounter.
I love your metaphor of the owner's manual because it avoids the way a lot of people think of the Bible as just God's arbitrary prescriptions. Like, I'm God, so I'm going to make you do this, this, and this. But instead,
well, he's the guy who created us. He made us.
It's a gift of love.
He understands what's wrong when things go wrong, and he knows how to fix it, which we don't.
I asked you earlier about Dorothy Sayers. There were 5 other authors. There are 5 other authors archived here at the Wade. Tolkien, Williams, Owen Barfield. Did you have a chance? Did you hear your folks talking about Tolkien, Barfield, Charles Williams?
Well, I never met Charles Williams. He died before I came on the scene, but I knew Tollers a little bit. He was very, very kind to me. I knew Barfield, who was a very nice guy. I didn't think he was exceptionally intelligent, mind you. Not on the same level as people like Tollers and Jack and my mother. But he was a very fine, very nice man. I attended a few Inklings meetings when I was a child. And
what memories do you have of those?
I was given a half pint of bitter. I usually managed to persuade the barman to give me the other half when nobody was looking. But these men would all sit down around a table with their pipes going and the beer and so on. And they would have a wonderful time together. You could always tell when the Inklings were meeting in a pub because there'd be roars of laughter, sort of shaking the rafters of the place. They had a great time. They were very humorous, extremely nice people, all of them. Who else was in that list? Is Chesterton represented here?
Yes,
he is.
He is.
One of those wonderful stories about G.K. Chesterton, I never met him, but one of the most wonderful stories I've heard about him, I think was told by the Jackal Warning, was during the First World War. I mean, Chesterton was a very rotund, heavy-set man. Some woman approached him with a white feather in her hand, saying, "Young man, why aren't you out at the front?" He said, "Madam, if you will walk around to the side, you will see I am indeed out at the front." I loved it. But I mean, that's the sort of thing that Jack and Warney loved too, that kind of reaction. But Chesterton, of course, was a great man too, without a doubt. I'm just wondering who else of the Inklings I met. I met Hugo Dyson, of course, who's most famous for making one of the most crass comments about an elf I've ever heard. But a very nice man, very nice guy. I met him on a couple of occasions. The interesting thing is that though I never met these men, I never really knew these men very well, I missed them. I missed the fact that Jack could be there with such a wonderful group of friends around him, having a whale of a time, and at the same time, talking about things which were hugely important to mankind all the time.
I believe it's called Dyson, a roaring cataract of nonsense,
Yes,
which is an interesting way to be remembered by history. I wanted to go back to some of your reminiscences.
Don't forget, Hugo Dyson and Ron Tolkien were the two people who brought
Jack to Christ.
Right.
In the end.
Right.
After everything else that the God could throw at him and build up in him, these two finally put the cap on it. Walking around Addison's Walk one night. Yeah.
You talk about wishing that table downstairs could speak and all.
Well, I wish I had
memories
had a
would
tape
come back.
recorder concealed under it.
Right. The same thing with Addison's Walk. Wouldn't you love to hear the specifics of that
absolutely.
conversation?
Yeah. Well, I know what they did. They pointed out to Jack that he could accept the dying God who dies for his people and then comes back. In all the mythology of the world, when he's faced with the truth of it, he couldn't stand it. And he had to make a very serious intellectual decision at that point as to why that was and what he could do about it.
There's an interesting book on conversion that says often loss of faith is a disaffiliation, that you don't identify with those people, such as the political Christianity of Ireland. But it says that often coming to faith involves affiliation. And I think Lewis had heard that argument before about the dying God. But when he heard it from Tolkien and Dyson, these are the kind of people he could respect and admire. And I think it sank in a way that it might not have coming from a different source.
I think that both Tullis and Dyson would have pointed out to him that the reason it is in the mythology is because it's true.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the myths, as we know them, were people searching, long before Christ came, were people actually searching for God, not knowing they were doing so.
Mm-hmm.
And so they get these great big myths arriving in their mind. They don't know where from. It's not until much later that God decided to show himself complete and openly. And we get the Old Testament. And then, of course, people being, or the Jewish people, my people, being what they were, they messed it all up more often than not, and still are probably in some cases. And Jesus came to correct all that and put it right again.
Well, part of Lewis's originality is when he did apologetics, he always came from a fresh direction. Rather than talking about the historicity of this, he talked about the dying God myth becomes history with Jesus Christ. He talked about your internal sense of right and wrong as a clue to the universe and mere Christianity, and this whole experience of sin-soaked, of sweet desires, this kind of homesickness for heaven. That's part of what I value about him is his apologetics always came from his personal experience, and it came from inside of himself. It wasn't sort of
well, I personally believe slightly differently that it came through him from Jesus Christ.
Okay, well, that's a better way to put it. I agree. If you've been enjoying our podcast so far, we encourage you to reach out to us. Send us an email at wade@wheaton.edu or connect with us on social media. If you're not already, follow us on Instagram at The Wade Center and stay informed about upcoming episodes of The Wade Center's podcast and our guests. Thank you for listening. See you next time at The Wade Center.